Hi, everybody. Our webinar today is on students in the archives. Just a quick couple of webinar housekeeping things before we get started. We'll do a Q&A at the end, so please hold your questions till the end. We are recording this webinar, and I will email out a link to the recording tomorrow to everybody who registered. And then please stay muted with your microphone off until we get to the Q&A. And if you'd like to unmute then and shout out some questions, that's fine, but just hold off until the end. So very quickly, Backlog is presenting this webinar. Backlog is my company that I started 2 years ago, and we work with smaller institutions to help them bridge the digital divide, bring their collections online. And a couple of the things that we do archival consulting. So we do some volunteer training, do policies and procedures, help set up digital archives. And then we also do genealogy research. So if you've got a brick wall in your family history, that's something that we can help tackle. And I'm Emma. I founded Backlog 2 years ago after being laid off during the pandemic. I kind of thought that a lot of places needed a little bit of help, but not full-time help or couldn't afford full-time help. And so that's kind of where Backlog comes in. And then Jenna is here today to give the webinar, and she works with me.
Hi, so I'm Jenna. So I am a museum archivist, formerly a university archivist. And so I also help out at Backlog. And I spent a lot of my career as a solo archivist, so doing all of the things that we now get to collaborate to do, Emma and I together, so that's nice. So I've worked a lot with students, so I'm excited to share my experiences and hopefully impart some wisdom, dare I say, wisdom.
Okay.
So I've illustrated this whole thing with medieval woodcuts because I thought it would be more interesting than looking at stock footage or stock photos. So we've got a great collaboration going on in this image. So if you are hiring students in a university archive or local history center, doesn't matter. There are many different forms that employment can take. And so I have been an undergraduate working in archives, I've been a grad student working in archives, and then as a professional, I have supervised both undergrads and grad students. So I like to think I've seen everything. So when you're starting your hiring process, there are a couple of different structures. You might be hiring a student who's earning internship credit, usually in like perhaps a library program, but a history program, a preservation program, something like that. They might be working in the federal work-study program. So that is something that's part of a university student's financial aid package. So not all students at a university will be eligible for that. But if you have the funds in your budget to hire any student, regardless of whether there's federal work-study money, you can create a position and hire any student. But federal work study includes, the way the program works is that the federal government gives some money to the school to pay students who are working. So that's why only some students are eligible. So you might also have volunteers. I'm hesitant to advocate too much for this because I think if students are working, they should either be getting credit or getting paid, or both. If you can pay your interns, I think that's very wise. I think a lot of us in this field have done a lot of unpaid work, starting from when we were first starting out in the field. So volunteering, it's one thing if you have a day where you need a bunch of boxes moved and you have a bunch of students come in and help you move them. But for something regular where they're coming in a couple of days a week or once a week, then there really should be some sort of compensation, whether it's credit or money. Next slide, please. So when you're designing your student positions, there are some things that there's some restrictions that you need to think about that you wouldn't necessarily have to think about if you were hiring a full-time or a part-time employee. There might be campus restrictions on what type of work that students can do, the number of hours per week they're allowed to work. Especially if they're work-study students, their schoolwork always comes first. And regardless of what type of arrangement I've had with a student for their work, I've always said your schoolwork comes first. If you've got a really big project coming up and you need extra time and you can't come in for your shift, like that is more important because they're in college to go to college. So flexibility is really key. Student schedules are nuts. They always get different stuff that's popping up. They've got lots of activities. Things might be getting canceled or rescheduled. So being flexible with the time that they come in, whether it's the actual clock time or the number of hours, is really important. And it's also important to think about the fact that students might not have the same labor protections as other workers. So, for example, anytime I've been doing anything a bit dangerous or like moving a ton of stuff, anything precarious, I will do it and not have a student do it because I'm like, I don't know if a student can get workers' comp, and they're probably not entitled to sick time or vacation time. So anytime that they're not working, they're not getting paid. So take those things into consideration in your management of students. And also think about any learning outcomes on your campus. So your campus employment office might ask you to follow the National Association of Colleges and Employers competencies. For example, there are job skills that a campus might expect students to develop while they're a student. So really talk to the campus office for employment, or if you're an offsite, like you're not part of the university, make sure you have a contact at the school to make sure you're kind of following the same guidelines as on-campus employers. Next slide, please. So learn what your institutional requirements are for hiring, doing performance reviews, and discipline. Learn what those are because you might have a very intense reviewing process that you have to go through. In the institution where I used to be, we had to do end of semester reviews and end of year reviews and compare them to make sure that students not only were getting their performance reviewed, but also that they were learning how to articulate what it was that they were learning and the skills that they were building. So, depending on what type of institution you are, find out how that ought to be structured and from a human resources standpoint. If you are hiring any sort of volunteers, and this goes for students or people in the community, people who are retired archivists, whatever. I have had it easier as a manager to do a volunteer contract for a set project. Doesn't have to be a set period of time, but it is easier to know that a person is coming in to do a certain thing, and I didn't have to come up with something for them to do whenever they dropped in. So volunteers would have a schedule. And I had some community people. I had some people who were filling the gap between grad school and professional work. So I had lots of different types of people who volunteered before, just not undergrads. So I work out a project with them, define the terms of that project and its deliverables. And I mean, I suppose it's less a contract and more a memorandum of understanding. So we knew what to expect from each other and our responsibilities toward each other. And I think that also is much more valuable for anyone who is trying to build experience. If they just graduated from either an undergrad or a graduate program, trying to get a full-time job, they can say, I did this project working for this archival institution. So maybe it's I scanned this collection and I described it, or I processed this manuscript collection, or I rehoused 8,000 slides in a slide collection or something, or I helped design an exhibit. So that's much more valuable than I was a volunteer. I did, I don't know, just, whatever from week to week. I did, other tasks as assigned. So it's much more valuable on their resume. And I think to you as the manager to have a clearly defined project. And when it comes to doing any sort of reviewing, really take that seriously. You know, I did see when I was working at a university, some managers really didn't take the review process seriously, didn't want to have the conversations with the students. But the students might think, oh yeah, I have, you know, fun working in the archives, but they can't necessarily connect it to job skills. So having those discussions, not just about their performance, but what it is that they're actually learning, is really valuable. So if you have the opportunity to do any sort of reviewing, do that. And if there isn't any sort of review process in place, make sure you're having conversations with your students to help them connect what they are learning to things that they might encounter when they're out in the world as adults. Next slide, please. So it can be scary jumping into a new job, getting in, you know, jumping into college, jumping into an archives environment, which is very different from any other workplace. They might be, you know, learning new skills, things that they've never encountered before. You know, what student at, you know, 18 or 19 has written metadata for photographs before? So the approach I always take is I say, I don't want to abandon you, but I also don't want to hover. So they know that I'm trying to assess where they are at if I go over a process with them that they're going to be doing. And so I want the students to feel okay asking questions, because it's awful when you're in an environment and you're trying to do your best and questions are not encouraged. Or if someone makes you feel stupid for asking a question or asking for clarification. Everyone communicates differently, and there are vocabulary differences across cultures, across generations. So always offer yourself, say like, hey, we could go through a couple of these together, or I can show you, you know, I can show you again at any time. If you're struggling, you know, or maybe you haven't done this task in a while, let's go over it again. But if they've got it, say, you know, I don't want to hover. So if you've got it, awesome, but grab me if you need me. And I have found that's really empowering for students, and they will come ask questions if they run into trouble, but they'll be like, yep, I'm going to jump in. 15 minutes later, they might run into something that they hadn't thought of, you know, small problem, and they'll come get me because they feel comfortable. So I also, because students are starting out, they're not professionals yet, I try to build in guardrails and sandboxes, sort of exploratory and experimental environments to encourage them to make a mess and learn. So for example, when I would have students working in our digital asset management system, so they would be describing photos and you know, creating Dublin Core metadata, I didn't give them publishing access, because then I could say, you can't break anything. You are not going to accidentally publish something that isn't ready for the world. So you're not going to delete a bunch of stuff. You don't have admin rights. And it's not that I don't trust you. It's that you can just kind of do whatever, and none of your mistakes are going to matter. And I think that really allows students to kind of go forth and like take more risks because the stakes are a bit lower. And as students start to grow in their positions and their knowledge and their comfort, really enable them and empower them to grow into managing their own projects. I have seen some really rewarding, I've had some really rewarding experiences watching students who maybe they have a gigantic description project. They take it upon themselves to learn more about architectural vocabulary to describe photos of buildings, or they want to do more of a research project rather than sort of repetitive descriptive stuff. So there are so many different things that students can latch onto and be good at. And I always tell them, hey, you're managing your own project. This is project management right here. You're setting your own kind of, we have a common goal, but you're setting your own pace and your own policies and procedures. And that's really important. And they're able to solve problems on their own or in concert with me or with their other student coworkers. And that they're not going to get out into a full-time professional job and freeze. because they're not comfortable in a decision-making environment. So, help students, guide them along the way, but if you can, kind of give them free rein to take on a project and make it their own. The next slide, please. So also important to consider is that, these students are not professionals, and it's unfair to have the same expectations of them that we would have of an employee. So these particular students are born, let's see, it's 2023. If they are undergraduates, they are probably born after the year 2000, after the year 2001. So they've had their educational experience disrupted by COVID. And, depending on how old they were, this could have been early in high school. College prep, the business of getting into college, is incredibly intense these days. And that might have kept them from working in high school because they might have had 800 extracurriculars that they were doing, and taking extra classes and doing advanced placement and doing 3 sports and an extra language because they wanted to get into their dream school. I mean, it was bad when I was applying to college, and it seems far, far, far worse now. Students who are in school today have always known a digital world, but not necessarily have had to troubleshoot computer problems. Like, I don't know if students get computer class anymore. I grew up learning how to use a computer. We had a computer class. We had to take a keyboarding class my freshman year of high school, and we also had to learn how to format our papers in Microsoft Word. So students might be really comfortable doing something on their phones, but they're not necessarily comfortable like working in Microsoft Office. So I have found that students learn quickly when you teach them, oh, like here's a keyboard shortcut, here's how you find something in Windows, but it might be new to them. And another thing I've really noticed working with undergraduate students is that mental health struggles and disabilities are more frequently diagnosed, but they're often invisible. So students do not owe you a disclosure, but just be flexible, be sensitive, be accommodating when students are, maybe they're migraine sufferers, maybe they have a learning disability, whatever it is that perhaps gives them a unique perspective on the world and a unique way of moving through the world. Treasure that instead of worrying about how it impacts their performance. Next slide, please. So once you actually make your hire and have students coming in, they need a workspace with enough space and adjustability to be comfortable. This isn't about specific furniture, but just a touchdown space, a place to put their bag, maybe a locking drawer in a desk, a chair. They need the flexibility and openness to any sort of accommodation. So just ask, is there anything that would make this workspace more comfortable for you? They need access to supplies and encouragement to use them. Like, hey, the folders are here, go for it. You don't need to ask every time you want to use a supply or get a new pencil. They're also going to need access to the equipment that they're going to be using, if it's scanners, photography equipment, whatever. So think about what they are going to need to use in order to actually do their job, and have that in place so that they can just get started. And students need understanding and grace. And there are going to be times where maybe you feel like, oh, I really need my student to be here more, or whether it's physically, or I need more of their attention, or I'm frustrated. Students are doing this job is one part of their huge lives and very busy lives. Like, I don't think anybody does more in their lives of greater variety than when they're in college or graduate school. So there's no point in being draconian, I find, if it's not endangering themselves, their coworkers, or the collection. Don't sweat it. I never worried about enforcing a dress code, worrying if a student was going to be if they're a little bit late. Communicate with them, say, hey, just let me know if you're going to be late, that's fine. some students could never find parking, and that's really annoying for them. So I came to expect it, but like we had a conversation about it, and it's fine. Or sometimes a student gets an appointment with a professor last minute that they didn't think they were going to be able to go to. Just be understanding, just encourage open communication so that they don't feel like they can't tell you or they can't change their schedule, because it's such a better environment when they just feel that they can ask questions and have agency to make this job their own. Next slide, please. So when you're coming up with what your students are actually going to do, different students will be attracted to different sorts of projects, and according to their personalities, but also according to what day it is and how they feel. So any repetitive tasks like scanning, rehousing things, like say you've got a bunch of slides, a bunch of photos that need to go into new sleeves, any sort of tidying or sorting supplies or books, you have students who are really into that. I had a student who was really great at making like paper enclosures for things. Some students really want to work with their hands, some want to work with a computer. It depends on the day. Sometimes they might be sick of looking at a computer, so they want to do something different. You might have students doing really open-ended research projects, perhaps doing the research for a collection's biographical and historical note, working with the collection, writing the notes for the finding aid, perhaps actually doing the processing project. You might have a combination of doing basic metadata and processing, doing some brief research like information retrieval, answering some reference questions when someone says, hey, what's the date that this event happened? And they're going to go into your collection and get that answer for you. And students are probably going to be there going to be at work for less than a day at a time, like 2 to 4 hour shifts probably. So keep a list of small tasks that come up that oh yeah, I do need this moved, or I need like this box put back, or there's this ongoing like shifting project where we need to make space on this shelf, so we need to push all the boxes a little bit this way, so that if a student finishes a project or a task, but they've still got like 25 minutes, yeah, it's not really enough time to start a whole new project, but you can always give them something small. And I also keep a bibliography of readings and videos related to archives and archival practice, and just the profession of working in cultural heritage that I give to students to say, hey, well, I'm going to send you a cool video. So sometimes it's a short film. There's a French New Wave film. It's about 20 minutes long about the Bibliothèque Nationale, and it's very avant-garde. And I always make my students watch it because it's just it's meditative, thinking about the vast universe of information and how we retrieve it and interact with it and how we build knowledge. And also sometimes I find keynote addresses from archives or museum conferences, or conference presentations, or I find interesting articles about something related to archival practice. So I can just give them that, say, hey, I'm gonna send you a cool article. You've got like 15 minutes, you can just read some of that. And it's also great if a student, maybe needs to work from home. They just still would like to get paid, but maybe they're in quarantine or something. Say, hey, read this, because it will enrich their work. Next slide, please. So, and I assumed this too when I started hiring students, that I would be hiring pretty much all history students, but they're going to learn stuff other than history in the archives. And I have put spreadsheets in all caps because every student who's ever worked with me has learned how to run a spreadsheet, how to enter data, how to manipulate it. They're not writing like formulas or doing pivot tables or anything. I don't even know what a pivot table is, but they learn how they can drag and number things, how they can move rows around, how you structure information in a spreadsheet, like what a row is for, what a column is for. And I think everyone who goes into any type of job is probably going to look at a spreadsheet at some point. Students are going to learn about metadata, and that's also very valuable in a lot of different fields. I had a biology student who was doing archival description for me for a couple of semesters, who said that she had a summer job working with medical records, and what she had learned in the archives really helped her conceptualize the work that she was doing. They're going to be learning about record keeping and records management, and I think that just thinking about like how things get to archives and how people need to use information that was created however long ago helps students think about how we build knowledge, and also what kind of records you need for organizational continuity. So hopefully they're going to get into workplaces and maybe help manage do a really good job helping to manage the records in that workplace. Depending on your collection, students might get a lot of experience with art and object handling. And there are entire careers that you can build on art handling, moving paintings and installing them for exhibits, especially for like really large museums. They either have in-house people to do that, or they contract out. That can be a full-time job, that can be a career. And students are also going to be learning about curation, education, exhibit design. So they're learning how to communicate with a public, with an audience. They're learning about how to create a narrative out of particular objects. And, if students are in education, if they're in marketing, if they're English majors, those are valuable skills, because being able to communicate with different types of tools and different types of objects is really valuable, no matter what they want to do in their lives after college. Next slide, please. And there's also a lot to be learned from our students. They may have domain knowledge that's related to their collections, that they might speak another language. They might have a cultural background that employees do not have. I had a really amazing experience where I was processing the papers of a Jewish architectural historian. There's also a lot of Judaica in the collection. So there were things in Hebrew, and I had a student who explained some cultural things to me. So there was an envelope that said something about Hebrew texts for burial. And I was like, what is this? Is this like from a funeral, like a burial event? And she said, no, like if something, if particular holy texts can't just be thrown away or recycled, they need to go through the process of shemos at the synagogue. And I never knew about this. And that's a huge like cultural competency gap that I had, that I was able to fill because I saw my student as a source of knowledge. So students might also have particular skills or interests that are really valuable to your collections. Maybe they're actually was the same student, really good at making enclosures. They might, they can make envelopes or boxes or any sort of custom housing. They might have digital experience or audiovisual experience. Maybe they're a film student and they can help you out with your audiovisual preservation. They might be really good at social media, and I think it's very valuable to have your social media at least partially done by someone who is part of like the age group of the audience that you're seeking. I don't think there's anything less appealing than people who don't understand the social media environment trying to make posts like, hello, fellow kids. And students might also have like really great software experience, like with Photoshop, if they're graphic design students or art students, especially. My Photoshop skills have kind of gone by the wayside, but if I had a student who was really good at, say, photo retouching or using programs like Adobe Bridge to do mass metadata embedding and cropping and things like that, then that would be awesome. So students have a lot to offer. They might not be the things that we expect, like I said before, they might not have had a job before, and maybe they're learning still how to be in an office, but they have lots of other skills that can be really useful and can build a much richer environment in your archive. The next slide, please. And if you don't have students, or just as a complement to your student workers, You can also work with faculty to bring archives work into the classroom. I have done this a couple of times and it's awesome. You can bring a project like group inventorying. So you can say, I have got 20 boxes and there are 20 students in this class. Here, I'm gonna teach you how a collaborative spreadsheet works. You've got it set up with all your metadata fields, and each student is gonna get a box and they're gonna record information about each folder. So after an hour and a half, you've got something fully inventoried that you didn't have, that would take you or a single person a much longer period of time. I've had students write metadata for a postcard collection. Everybody got a few postcards. Again, collaborative worksheet. Also, if you need stuff moved, awesome. Like, get 20 people in there. Any sort of sorting or rehousing, any like big mass projects. If there's a class that where the professor wants the students to learn more about the heritage professions, that sort of thing, it's like, this is what you'll be doing. So it doesn't have to be a long-term arrangement, and if you don't have the ability to actually hire students, maybe you just collaborate with a single class by connecting with a faculty member, or maybe with a particular club on campus or something like that, so that you can have students just a kind of a one and done. They learn a little bit about the heritage professions. They get a little taste of the metadata and the spreadsheets and all of those other skills that we want to impart to them. But you don't necessarily have to worry about having a student for a full semester. Or you could do this on top of also having your hired students. So just another idea. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, really, I've just advised people to respect the time and labor of student workers. Like I said, I've been in all of the different positions. I've been an undergrad working in the archives. I've been a graduate student. I've been paid. I've been unpaid. And I had a really odd experience at a professional conference a few years ago, where people were complaining a lot about their student workers and the skills that they didn't have. And it just felt so like such a missed opportunity to connect with people who are new adults and can contribute so much, and that can become collaborators if you take the time to mentor them. So find out if your institution or your organization allows raises for merit or longevity or seniority. I was really lucky when I was an undergrad. Our school did allow for that. So each year you stayed in a job, you got a tiny raise. So just encouraged people to stay in their positions and rewarded sort of like long time service. And make sure that you allow for downtime, celebrations, and kind of hanging out time and community building, because you might not just have one student, you might have a couple, and they're going to learn how to work together. And I mean, I think I would tell any manager of any group of people that this is important. Encourage your students to learn from each other and to collaborate. So you might have a student who learns a particular process. Like I had a student who was scanning, let's see, they were old periodicals related to local history, and scanning them and cropping them a particular way to generate a particular type of PDF. And this student knew this process much better than I did. And so when another student was coming on to help, because it could be done, you grab an issue, you scan it, another person can be working on different issues. So when it came time to bring on another student, the first student trained them. So, and finally, celebrate your accomplishments as a department. I think it's so important to teach students how to be among us as heritage workers, maybe inspire them to join the field. Maybe they definitely don't want to become an archivist or a museum professional or a librarian, but they really enjoy this, and they're going to always value those types of institutions moving forward. And have solidarity with your students, and sometimes you work through really tough things together, and when you accomplish them, celebrate them, celebrate the work that you do, celebrate each other, and have an open mind, I would say, to the great variety of experiences and ways of being that students are bringing into your archives. So I am very open to questions. I can tell more anecdotes or tell me some anecdotes. So thanks for listening.
We'll take questions in just a second, but first I'm going to talk about our upcoming webinars. This Sunday, we're going to do a quick one on digital inheritance. So basically what happens to your social media accounts and your email when you pass away. There's several, every online platform handles it differently. So we'll go through a couple of those. And then in August, Jenna is going to walk us through climate change. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about how climate change impacts archives, how archives impact climate change, and sort of the carbon footprint of our work, and how being in a changing world with many more natural disasters and a lot more uncertainty affects memory work.
And then our last summer webinar.
Yes, I'm going to be talking about, so, you know, I think I said it earlier, it's like museum professionals and archivists and librarians, all these interconnected fields. You could throw archaeologists in there too. Sometimes I call them the cousin professions. So there are so many different fields that are related to cultural heritage, but they have different standards, different ways of entering those professions, like different educational backgrounds, sometimes different vocabularies. And I have also found it a very interesting experience to go from being an archivist in an academic library to being an archivist working with museum professionals. In both cases, I'm the only archivist. So I'm gonna talk about those different communities and how they connect and where they differ.
And then we'll answer questions pertaining to this webinar in a second. But if you have any questions about us or the work we do, that's my email at the bottom. And this just talks about, and then our website. And if you go to our website /webinars, that's how you can register for the other webinars. Yay. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to unmute or to throw something in the chat. In the chat, we have, an archaeologist.
Oh, yeah.
And
she, let me put it in the chat because it's French and I can't pronounce it. It's something, it's like toutes les mémoires du monde. It's like all the memory in the world. And it's on YouTube. It's something like this in the chat.
Okay.
And I have just found, like, from people sharing on Twitter or from conferences I've gone to, and when I hear a great speech, I try to find it, and if it's been recorded, share that with my students, or, you know, kind of keep a little bibliography. And sometimes like blog posts from other special collections. You know, it doesn't have to be an academic article, but just seeing what other institutions are doing. That's really interesting and promotes being thoughtful about the work that they're doing.
And I think it also helps to kind of moor the students so they know where the project they're doing it, you know, like works in the rest of the archive. And so, like sometimes, like, why do we do item level versus folder level? Like can really, like, things that may seem basic to someone who's been working in archive for a long time can really be missed on somebody who's new.
Yeah. And the other types of collections that are out there. So, you know, maybe you don't have a ton of collections related to a particular time period, but it's cool for students to learn about other types of archives. And actually, I should have mentioned this earlier, you know, when you're working with a class, you might have a class of, you might work with like a biology class because you've got a natural history collection and you do not have a bio background, but these kids know a lot about ornithology or something, and they can help with the scientific description. You know, you can really expose students through the work or through readings to the many different types of collections that are out there. Tell me about your favorite students. The very first student I ever hired is now herself an archivist. So that felt pretty good.
I used to do end of the semester pizza parties with my first student. And it was like, we got through this together, me as a first time professional and you always asking me what's next. And so it's just kind of nice to kind of celebrate those things together, build camaraderie. And he was like a biomedical student, like had nothing to do with history, but
Yeah.
he was pretty gung-ho about everything.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But if there are no questions, oh, Emily just wrote that they include a student section in their newsletter.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. If you have a blog or any sort of publication where students can actually, and then they can say, I wrote this article, it's under publications on my resume.
Yeah, we did kind of a photo of students working and kind of asked them where they're from. And I had like 4 students in the archives at that time. And I learned so much. Like I learned that one of my students like lived on a llama farm. And also just kind of, and he commuted 90 minutes to school every day. And it was just like how different students' backgrounds are. Like sometimes you have students who are coming from a suburban high school who have much different computer skills than other students. So we just kind of what Jenna was talking about earlier, we assume that everybody, just because they're a digital native, everybody comes with different skills. But then that kid had like the best, Photoshop skills because it was a hobby of his. But one thing that students, it's kind of like converting to a JPEG or a PDF. That's usually something that I do a lot to send, reference requests via email that definitely have to remember to walk a student through. But yeah, I think the highlighting students or, they're writing and researching the segment. And that's great because I'm sure that's something that we could all easily pass off.
Yeah. I had a grant funded student working on a particular project related to documentation of slavery. And she really became the expert on that project. And a faculty member contacted her, not through me. And it was like not even from her department, and said, can you come talk to my students about this project you're doing? I don't even know how she heard about it, but it's really awesome when your students have like a professional reputation because of the archives.
And sometimes they can be your biggest ambassadors, kind of to speak to what you just said.
Yeah.
To kind of even say that, hey guys, we exist. We're in a corner of the library, but we're out here.
Bring your friends.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap. And I will email this out to everybody tomorrow. And then I hope to see you in August for our other webinars. We're also going to do one on family Bibles and family Bible research and genealogy. I just haven't put all of that marketing material together yet, but we've got some fun ones in August. So I hope to see everybody there. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.